Hey guys, Brandon here, and today I have a quick tutorial for you guys on the settings that I use in Photomatix Pro the most. So this is going to be a walkthrough of kind of my settings that I use in Photomatix. And I'm not telling you that these are the right or wrong settings for Photomatix or your HDRs. These are just the settings that I use the most, or the sliders that I use the most. So, to start off, I'm just going to load the bracketed photos here, and when that dialog box opens up, I'm just going to press browse, and as you can see, I have a 7-shot HDR here. So if I go through, if you look at the thumbnail previews, you can just see the images. And make sure you select all of the photos. You can do that by pressing the first one, holding shift, and selecting the last one, and that will select all of them in between. So go ahead, and after you do that, press open. And there's really nothing else you can do in this dialog box, except I am going to leave this checked because I do want to see the merged HDR before I tone map it. So I'm just going to press OK and make sure you have all your files in this list. So press OK. And then you get the pre-processing options. And since this was on a tripod, I'm going to leave align source images unchecked since I did not move the camera. Reduce ghosting artifacts. Nothing really was moving in the scene since there was no trees or water or people or anything. So I'm just going to leave that unchecked. Reduce noise. I definitely want to check it on because this was a nighttime HDR. And so it was pretty dark. And I want to set it to normal and underexposed images that way. Because you really don't need noise reduction on overexposed images. So those two work fine at strength around 95 or 100. Whatever works best for you. Reduce chromatic aberrations, I definitely want to leave checked because I really do not want any color fringing. You get a lot of that in nighttime HDR, so I'm going to leave that checked. White balance, as shot, Pro Photo RGB, that is what I use in my workflow, so I'm just going to leave that set. And I'm going to press OK. And as you can see, it's going to convert it's going to convert the raw files into HDR and merge them together. So this may take a while, so I'm just going to pause the screen recording until we pick up once it is done. So as you can see, it is done processing now, and don't be alarmed when your HDR pops up looking like this. This is not your final image. This is before it is what's called tone mapping. And tone mapping basically takes the merge HDR and makes it look good, is the only way I can describe it. This is just all the exposures combined in a 32-bit preview. So, I'm going to click on Tone Mapping / Fusion, and right away you'll be able to see an actually good-looking preview. So, and depending on how many shots you have, it may take longer time. And I'm just going to close these two windows over here, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse to do that. And so you have your image open. And the first thing I always do is come down here to presets, click on the drop down, scroll up, and click on default. Now it will reset all the settings to their default. Because no HDR image is the same and you do not want to use the last settings from your last HDR. So, the first setting I come straight to is these I always leave on default, tone mapping and details enhancer. So the first setting is strength. And the first thing I do, I drag it all the way to the left, so all the way to 0. And then all the way to the right to 100. And see which one looks better. In this case, 100 looks a little overdone, and 0 looks way underdone. So I want to keep it somewhere around 80. That looks good for me. Maybe a little higher, maybe something like 90. So that looks good. Color saturation, I leave alone. Luminosity, I leave alone. Micro contrast, I leave alone. Next thing is smoothing. Some people like to do it in light mode. I like to leave it just in standard slider form. So once again, all the way to the left, and all the way to the right. And this looks a little too un-HDR for my taste, so I'm going to keep this almost all the way to the left. That looks pretty good. Maybe a little more. It's a little much. And as you can see, I'm just playing with the sliders. So that's all I do for smoothing. Next, white point, black point, and gamma. This is where I first got confused when I first started HDRs. So, white point, picture this, if you have any Photoshop experience, picture this as your levels dialog box. You have your mid-tone slider, your black slider, and your white slider. So the white points, all of the highlights, the white point controls all the highlights. So I want to keep it dark, relatively dark, but as you can see, you lose some contrast. And I'm going to raise the blacks. And then, so it looks a little low contrasty. So I'm going to get that back by raising the gamma. The gamma to the left is to brighten it, just like Photoshop's levels. Or I'm sorry, to darken it. So I want to, if we go to the right, remember this was a nighttime HDR, so I want to keep it more to the left, so it's more dark. Somewhere around 1.13 looks good. And again, you won't have to use the same numbers as me. You will use whatever looks good on your image. I leave the color settings alone, so we could close those. And then down here, I might just play with the micro smoothing. I will probably, most of the time I leave that all the way down. Highlight smoothness, I leave all the way down. So pretty much all of these, I leave all of them at 0. So I could collapse those. And then if I see something that I could want to change a little bit, like the smoothing, maybe I want to get a little more less smooth, could lower that a little bit. Gamma, I probably want a little brighter, so I'm going to drag that back to the right. And the white point, can drag up a tiny bit. That looks good. So, those are the mostly used settings that I use in Photomatix. Once again, go out and experiment. That's the best way to learn, is to experiment. And those are the processes that I use in Photomatix. Thanks for watching. Just going to hit process on this image, and it will go through process, and you could save it and do whatever you would like with your image. That's all for today. I'll see you guys tomorrow once again on BrandonJFX.com.